Welcome to the Hobby Wrecker channel. Today, we're going to be wrecking criticism against the ELO system in 40k.
Let's get into it.
So the other day, we came out with a video explaining how the ELO system works and how it could be implemented in 40k, and introduced a test league that we're going to be doing in the Midwest. But we wanted to cover it again because we posted it at a couple social media outlets and we got some people saying some good ideas, some people praising the idea, and some people that had arguments against it. And some of the criticism makes sense, as in it's cautionary, right? There are certain things that we have to watch out for, but that's also not a reason to reject the system at face value. Anyway, we'll get into that though. Yep. So first, just a quick review. What is the ELO rating system? It was a mathematical system developed specifically for chess, but it actually works for any two-player game. And what it does is it tracks player skill over time by assigning them a rating, and then their rating changes depending on the games they play against other players and whether they are ranked lower, equal, or higher to that player. So it's nice because the outcomes are fair. Players that are ranked similarly risk the same amount of rating change, whereas if you have a player with a lower rating playing a higher ranked player, they stand to gain more but lose less, and vice versa. The other nice thing about the ELO system that it's the formula is relatively simple, very, very transparent. You can see exactly what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, so it's really clear. If I beat someone who's rated higher than me, I got the rating. They lost the same amount of rating. It's completely fair. So there's always accountability if you feel like your score wasn't accurate.
So there's a few benefits that really attract us to the system, and I think it attracts a lot of other players as well. The first set of benefits is that it's an accurate measure of current skill. It's nice because players are compared directly to other players as time progresses in a straightforward, fair way. So this system of developing it over time is better than our current system that rewards investing a lot of time and money in traveling in order to get that high score. And when that's the case, the only players that you can really be compared to accurately are those that have traveled the same amount of time and have put in the same resources as you, which, how do you even keep track of that? We don't have any way to do that.
And if you want me to get really spicy, it's basically just a watered down version of ELO, because the people who get the most points have the least losses, which is exactly what ELO would do as well.
But in a much more abstract way. In the current system, you could have a mediocre player travel to big events, and even if you have a better player doing smaller events, that mediocre player is going to have a higher score. The other nice thing based on that is the data that we get from ELO is much more useful to the amateur players, the players who can't or don't feel like traveling around a lot. With the ELO, they can compare themselves to people who are about the same level or have traveled about the same amount. Whereas in the current ITC system, it's basically useless for players who don't do a lot of traveling and really gun for that sort of thing.
It'll also incentivize you to have 5 good games a weekend of 40k, which I think is what a lot of people want at the core of it, who aren't going to be pushing for like top ITC awards or anything like that, because every game matters. Where now, if you and your opponent are both sitting there at like 1-3 at the end of the weekend, your game might not, one of the people might not care as much, and it might not matter as much, and it won't be a good game. And then you've suddenly paid for 5 games of 40k over a weekend and maybe only gotten 4 real ones.
Oh, absolutely. So that makes it so that you're invested in every game over the course of a tournament and you don't just give up halfway through.
Right.
ELO also offers a unique opportunity to give even more data sets. So you could track, potentially, if someone was very tech savvy, we could figure out how to track not only player ELO, but also those players' factions, club ELO, regional ELO. And I know there's a lot of data files out there who would just eat that up. And then, of course, the ELO being very transparent makes it very easy to analyze. And if you want more information about how ELO works or how you can use it for yourself in your local club, check out our previous video. I'll link that and put the link in the description below as well.
I would really implore you to watch that video before watching this one, because we're going to make a lot of assumptions about knowledge in this video based on that one.
So we touched on this briefly too, but ELO and 40k will definitely promote fairness. The way the formula works is lower ranked players don't have to be afraid of playing higher ranked players because they have less to lose. And in the current system, it actually disincentivizes newer players or more casual players from competing in events at all. because they just spent a bunch of money traveling to these tournaments, spent a bunch of time missing work, taking a weekend, and then they go get stomped, right, by these people who do this constantly. In the ELO system, hey, you're going to have a good time no matter what. You have a lot of opportunity to improve your score and your skill. And like we said earlier, every single game has potential benefits.
Now, what people are going to say at this point is, oh, yeah, but then the higher ranked player doesn't want to play the game because they lose a bunch of stuff and gain nothing. And to that, I say, yeah, and then you need to bracket your tournaments. So you could easily have a bracket that says you need to be 1,400 ELO or less to apply for this bracket, and then 1,400 ELO or above to apply for the other bracket. So you could start to normalize and make divisions in the system to make sure that you're not just having people win your event because they got a lucky round of pairings or 3 or anything like that. Or how many times have you gone to an event, just like you see the guy gets a new guy and you know he's going to win because he's gone to 50 tournaments over the last 3 years, and everyone just sighs because like, yep, he always gets the guy and he always gets a free win.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? So we're trying to limit the system so that way it's meaningful for everybody. And then a lot of people are going to say, yeah, we don't want to split up our events because we might not fill them all up. And to that I say 40K is a growing community, and I think we can start to support it. And if we don't put the infrastructure in place now, it'll be incredibly hard when we do grow to that stage.
And I would argue that this would actually improve people coming out.
Correct.
It would improve the number of competitors because new players would feel less intimidated, and they would feel like, hey, I'm going to be playing people along my level. These games are going to be a lot more fun, more even. I'm not just going to spend all day getting stamped into the ground. And those same players, let's say they get a nice groove going, they now have a goal. They can improve their ratings in order to go up into the next bracket.
And if you're familiar with the Games Workshop Open Series, the US Open Series, they've basically done this, but in a microcosm. It's a 3-day event. You go Friday, Saturday, Sunday. The first 4 games put you in a pool, and then whoever wins the pool actually gets an award. So you could go 0-4 your first 4 games, you get put in the bottom pool, and then win all your games and win your pool and still get an award for it in the GW Series, which I see as an implementation of ELO, and they've almost done it with that system.
I love the idea, honestly. That sounds amazing. It sounds really fun. So now let's get into some of the criticisms, some of the counter arguments that we've seen already. So we sort of generalize them into categories, but basically these are what they're saying.
It's the gist of the argument.
Yes. So the first one is there's a commentary that, hey, this is a dice game. Hey, it's a random number generator. Hey, there's a lot of luck involved in 40K. And you know what? That's true. That's absolutely true. However, this is a non-unique problem. We operate under the ITC, and we play in tournaments, and we give awards to players based on those outcomes. So regardless of what system we're using, we're still applying ratings and comparing players to one another, even though it's a dice game, and even though there is an aspect of luck involved. So if that's the case, why not choose a system that's going to benefit players the most? And if you don't want to be rated in a dice game, why are we having this conversation to begin with?
And I think that's perfectly fine, but that we're making this for a competitive community where people who don't want to be rated are definitely in the casual community. And I'm not throwing any aspersions on them.
Casual is great.
Yep, I support what they're doing. I support how they like to play the game. But for me, I want to play competitively, and I want to see my number, and I want to see how I can improve. And ELO is the most efficient way of doing that.
And besides, we like playing games with random elements and dice, partly because, we like the story, we like the models and things like that. But adding in a bit of randomness makes it uniquely engaging. It makes it interesting. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. And that's exciting. If you really wanted to play a balanced, non-random game, play checkers, right?
or chess, which would use an ELO system.
Absolutely. Both work. Honestly.
And that's the thing is, yes, there is an element of randomness, and we're not denying that. But everybody has within the same degree of randomness. Like, you're going to say, like, well, army like Custodes doesn't roll as many dice, so they're going to have higher swings. Sure. Compared to, like, an army of, like, let's say 300 Tyranid Gaunts, they're going to have more average dice because they're going to be rolling more. Great. But everyone is assuming luck, and they choose what luck they want to bring to the table, right?
And how they use that is definitely part of the skill of the game.
It's not imbalanced because everybody is playing on the same field.
And to say that, hey, you can't apply a rating system to a game of dice also doesn't make sense, because if you just use real-world observations of how the tournament scene plays out. Consistently, over the years, you see players who are in the top standing, they tend to stay in the top standings. despite the random elements. They've discovered that there are interactions in the games that can overcome the randomness of dice, that are consistent and that they can take advantage of, which means that it's not a game of randomness. It's a game with variables.
But those people just play the strongest army at any given time.
But not the case, right? It is perfectly possible to play the non-optimal codexes or lists and still come out with a consistently winning record.
There are certain players throughout the circuit who have chosen to play armies that they enjoy and have done fine with them, even though they're not the best performing army at the given time. Are they
absolutely
winning the ITC? No, but they can place within the top 10 or top 20, no problem.
Right. People like to specialize. They like to pick types of armies to play, and they'll play them regardless of what the new hottest thing is.
Well, I guess the best example would be Richard Siegler, who won his first ITC on the back of a Tau Codex that a lot of people didn't think was good. And then he also won the ITC last year on top of an AdMech Codex that people had felt was heavily nerfed, and no one is even playing it now, even after he won ITC with it. So you can see players like that who are wildly successful with armies that people don't consider super top tier.
Criticism number 2. I don't need a number to tell me how bad I am. This is basically a criticism of the idea of applying ratings in the first place. So, once again, we said it before, competing in tournaments or leagues or conferences or whatever you want to call it inherently compares players. If you don't want a rating, if you don't want to be compared to other players, then that's not for you. Don't compete. But like we said before, that's fine. If you are a beer and pretzels player, more power to you. It's a good time.
And I respect that, but I don't understand why those people are making that statement, because ITC also gives you a number based on how good you are. So it just seems odd to me that position is being taken.
They're going to have the same argument against an ITC system and an ELO system.
Right, but it's just not for them, which is fine. It shouldn't be.
So if you're going to have a system, why not pick a system that makes the games and it makes the competitive environment more enjoyable, right?
It's also a system that's been solved and figured out and doesn't have margins of error or modifications really needed. You can modify it to give more ELO for games for a shorter season standpoint, sure, but like all that stuff's been figured out, right? So
absolutely. And having a lower ELO score is not a punishment. It's a measure, and it's actually an opportunity to match your skill and grow in an arena, in a setting that it gives you the opportunity.
It shows you exactly where you're at, so you can start to grow and know areas that you can start to work on. I feel like it gives you a lot of presence of mind to think about, why am I here and how do I get out?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it makes it so that, especially if those tiered systems were implemented, like we mentioned before, it makes the experience just way more enjoyable. So another criticism is that, well, ELO can be gamed. It can be manipulated. Absolutely it can, right? People can figure out the math. They can figure out, hey, if I play this many games against these types of opponents, then my score will do this, which is what I want. Once again, non-unique. Right? People have figured that out with the ITC. They figured out, hey, if I go to so many tournaments, then things are going to turn my way eventually, and I can get the scores I want. Bottom line is no system is perfect, right? You can't expect perfection when you're making a plan to improve things. It's just not feasible.
Well, and someone actually figured that out for chess and got a Grandmaster title after it, and then the chessboard figured it out and then limited it what you could earn ELO off of. So what he was doing is he figured out I need to get 2,200 to get the Grandmaster title, for example. No, 24. So he was playing people who were like around 1,700 at really small chess tournaments and then just beating them. And he would get like 1 point of ELO for each win, but he just didn't lose. And then eventually he climbed up after like 6 months. And then they had to put limitations in place for that, so you couldn't keep doing that because they saw it as an abuse of the system. So we do need to police this system closely, but at least it's something that's easily watched and can easily be reacted to quickly.
And if you throw your hands in the air just because there is some way to game it, then you're just giving up, right? We, as a community, have figured out a lot of ways to make this game better. We're smart enough to figure this out, right? If a problem comes up, we can adapt.
Also, there's no perfect system in any sort of competitive environment, but it's about working together as a community to find the best system that can be modified over time and will give the fairest representation of where your personal or where your team is at. And so I think that making the argument that it is a flawed system, sure, but so is ITC.
Right. Non-unique. The next one that we saw, well, ELO doesn't work for short-term events or tournaments. The answer is it's not meant to. ELO isn't there to determine who wins an event. It's there to gauge skill in the long run. You can determine who wins an event by win-losses.
Yeah, look at that.
That's what you do in a tournament.
And I don't even think you pair by ELO for the first round. I think you keep it. Tournaments should not change at all. It should just be, instead of getting ITC points after each tournament, you're getting ELO points. And the person who goes 5-0 should still win the event. But it also creates more stakes in the last game, for example, because let's say if you have an established regional player who's 1800 ELO, and then a relatively new player who's met him in the final table who is 1400 ELO. Both those players have a lot to play for in that game, and it's not just the tournament.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that, hey, we don't have to use ELO to match up, but it does give us the opportunity to play with those tiers.
Right. You use it before the tournament to make sure that, not sorting, but make sure you're putting players with players of like skill, so you don't just get blown out your first game. Because, that can't be fun for a player who goes to the tournament and then they're like, oh, I've hit this super famous regional player and I know I have no chance against him. I'm just going to lose. That can't be fun. So you can start trying to limit that.
We saw this one a couple times as well. Rules change and events have different standards. So how can you apply scores to a system like that? Once again, this is a non-unique problem. ITC has to deal with this as well. Changes to the rules happen in every system, right?
If that's honestly your position, then I think that you should consider pushing ITC to put forward you can't use a book until it's been FAQ'd, or to have a community balance standard, because that's going to fix the problem that you're looking for. It's a problem that's outside of ELO.
And regardless, that would be great if we could have some kind of standardization like that, but everyone's playing under the same rule set.
Right.
Everyone has to make adjustments as rules changes appear in the game. And despite this, the top players, again, consistently remain at the top. They understand how to adapt, and that's part of the skill of the game as well.
Right.
And there was mention that tournament organizers have different standards. And to that, I would say, okay, yeah, that might be a problem, but that's a problem now anyway. And I think that organizers have a responsibility to examine common practices and make sure that their events are fair and consistent.
100%. Exactly. And yeah, that's another issue that needs to be discussed on a macro level. It's not the rating system that controls that. It's the body that controls the rating system, right? So that's something that we need to be talking to them about changing, if that's an honest complaint. And I think it's a very good one if it is.
And finally, one that I saw that was actually interesting. I had to do a little bit of research on it. The idea that ladders reduce fun by adding stress, and that looking to tournament results as a method of competitive measure is better. So I found that pretty interesting, because lots of games, I notice it in computer games as well, that players climb ladders to represent growth and skill, and then they earn things through that in addition to tournament results. I found that pretty interesting. However, once again, ITC does that as well. You have to go to events, you have to win, score high enough in order to gain points, and you have to continue to do that in order to make your points go higher if you want to keep that edge. And you're earning tournament wins at the same time. You're doing both.
Look at that. Yeah, exactly. And I want to hear more input, because I know someone brought up the fact that, like, for example, Magic the Gathering was using ELO of higher rated players to give them a buy, and it didn't work for that system. Great. As human beings, we learn from each other's history, and we can build up and become stronger because of that. That's why we're not still in caves painting pictures, right? We learned from that experience and we moved on with our lives. So just because they failed doesn't mean that this system has to too. We can see that history and we can learn from it, and we can implement different things in response to it.
If we implement an ELO system, it doesn't mean that it has to be used all the time. It still gives players the opportunity to experiment and have relaxed games by saying, hey, I'm going to try something new. Let's not have this be a ranked game. Right? Players can say, hey, let's do a test game, or they can put out a call to their club and say, I'm looking for a ranked game, or I'm looking for an unranked game. It's as simple as that.
And if anything, I think most ranked games should be in a competitive environment. So you should have to go to some kind of organized event to get it rating, because that's another way people could game the system, is just like, hey, I'm going to play the same dude over and over again until I can't get any points off of him. You know what I mean?
I think that would be the only way that, if the ITC implemented it, that's the only way to effectively regulate it. If you could only gain ELO ratings through competitive events.
100%, and I think that's how it should be.
I think that local leagues could certainly be a little bit more loose, and I think that clubs around the country or in the world could implement this on a small level and have it be more casual in that way. But ITC itself, yes, I agree. They would have to make this event only.
And that's a way they could pivot, because it's just a fairer, better system.
All right, so those are the major things we've seen, and based on that, I think we've answered a lot of the concerns, the criticisms. If you think that we missed something, put it in the comments below. We can continue the discussion and see where this takes us. The goal is to have more fun in the community, and I think this puts us on the right track.
And by no means are we saying that you guys are wrong or you shouldn't be listened to. I want this to be an open conversation, and I want to hear what other people have to say, because we certainly could have missed some things. So it'd be great to hear your input on it.
Make sure you put in the comments, and also don't forget to like and subscribe. We're going to have a lot of videos about this topic, especially as we're doing our own league, to practice and publish and discuss these events as well.
And please just come into it with an open mind. We can definitely analyze what you're having to say and think about it critically and give you fair credence, but please also give us the same courtesy and look at the league and see what you think after that, and we can prove it together. And that's what makes a strong community, and that's what we really want.
We're going to look at this from a factual, data, experience, real-world observation perspective. We're not trying to put in some sort of idealistic unicorn rainbow fantasy land. We're trying to make this real and useful for everybody.
But this conversation came up mostly because local friends of ours were saying that it would be a better system for a majority of reasons. So that's why this conversation started in the first place.
So, like we said, like, subscribe, comment below, and we'll see you in the future.
Thanks, guys.